On the morning of October 23, 1986, 4 men left their home in Tucker County, West Virginia, and drove into the Cumberland Mountains carrying hunting rifles and a resolve harder than the Appalachian stone beneath their boots. By noon on October 23rd, 11 people lay dead across 15 square miles of mountain forest. All adults, all eliminated with precise rifle shots and shotgun blasts. The perpetrators were the Turner family, father and 3 sons, moving through terrain they'd known since childhood like wolves protecting their territory. West Virginia State Police would later call it the most systematic territorial elimination in Appalachian moonshine history. But the reason behind the bloodshed wasn't drugs, wasn't organized crime, wasn't even a family feud passed down through generations. It was 500 acres of prime distilling land in Blackwater Hollow that had belonged to the Turner family for 40 years, land that outsiders had dared to claim as their own, and one father's unshakable belief that some violations demanded an answer written in blood. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. Tucker County, West Virginia, wasn't a place where people moved to in 1986. It was a place people left, watching in their rearview mirrors as the only home they'd ever known disappeared behind ridges that had sheltered their families for generations. The county covered 421 square miles of the most unforgiving mountain terrain in the eastern United States. Population barely 7,000 souls, scattered across hollows and ridges, where winter arrived in October and didn't leave until May. The mountains rose sharp and sudden, peaks reaching over 4,000 feet. Their slopes covered in dense forests of oak, hickory, and pine so thick that sunlight only touched the valley floors for a few hours each day. October in Tucker County meant temperatures dropping to 38 degrees at night, climbing to maybe 55 by afternoon if the sun managed to burn through the morning fog. The air smelled like wood smoke from coal stoves, damp earth, and that particular sharp scent of approaching winter that mountain people recognize instinctively. Mornings brought fog so thick you couldn't see 20 feet ahead on Route 219. The sound was wind moving through bare branches, distant chainsaws, and the occasional rumble of a pickup truck. Tucker County's economy had collapsed by 1986, not slowly but with the brutal finality of a mine shaft cave-in. The coal industry that had sustained these mountains for nearly a century was dying. Mechanization had eliminated thousands of jobs. Companies were pulling out, leaving behind sealed mine entrances and families with no way to make a living. Unemployment hit 42% that fall, highest in West Virginia, 3rd highest in the entire United States. For men who'd grown up believing that hard work in the mines guaranteed survival, watching the economy disintegrate felt like a betrayal of everything their fathers and grandfathers had promised them. In places like Tucker County, moonshine wasn't rebellion. It was survival. Had been since before Prohibition, would be long after. Federal taxes on legal liquor made it too expensive for mountain people earning nothing. So they made their own, following recipes passed down through generations, using skills their ancestors had brought from Scotland and Ireland 2 centuries before. The law said it was illegal. The mountains said it was the only economy left. And in 1986, with no other jobs available, moonshining was the difference between keeping your home and losing everything to bank foreclosure. The geography made enforcement nearly impossible. Tucker County contains some of the most remote terrain in West Virginia. Hollows so deep and narrow that cell phone signals, when they eventually arrived, would never penetrate. Roads that appeared on no official maps, known only to locals who'd driven them since childhood. State police barracks sat 35 miles away in Parsons. Sheriff's Department was understaffed, underfunded, and frankly uninterested in pursuing moonshiners who were just trying to feed their families. The unspoken agreement was simple. Keep it quiet, don't make trouble. And the law would look the other way. Water was everything in moonshine production. You needed cold, clean spring water, lots of it, flowing year-round. Blackwater Hollow had the best water in 3 counties, springs that ran crystal clear even in the driest summers, fed by underground aquifers that had flowed since before humans walked these mountains. The hollow was 500 acres of perfect distilling territory, hidden, accessible only by logging roads that washed out every spring, surrounded by dense forest that provided natural concealment. And it belonged to the Turner family. Jacob Michael Turner was 52 years old that October, though the mountains had aged him beyond his years. He stood 6 feet tall, but walked with a forward stoop from 3 decades spent hunched in coal seams, barely 4 feet high. His hands were massive, knuckles swollen with arthritis, fingers permanently stained black from coal dust that no amount of scrubbing could remove. A thick beard, more gray than black now, covered the lower half of his face. Deep-set eyes, the color of winter sky, watched everything, revealed nothing. A scar ran from his right temple to his jaw, souvenir from a roof collapse in 1973 that killed 2 men standing beside him. Every morning, Jacob woke at 4:30 in the house his grandfather had built in 1923, made coffee in a percolator so old the bottom was worn thin, and sat at the kitchen table reading from a King James Bible his mother had given him in 1954. He'd read 1 chapter, drink his coffee black and strong enough to strip paint, then step outside to watch the sun rise over Canaan Mountain. He'd smoke 1 cigarette, unfiltered Camel, and then start his day checking the stills hidden 3 miles back in Blackwater Hollow, following trails only he and his sons knew. He'd married Sarah Louise Keller in 1955, right after his discharge from the Army. They'd had 4 sons. Daniel was 28 now, the oldest, serious and methodical, the one Jacob trusted to run operations when he couldn't. Michael was 26, quieter than Daniel but just as capable, the thinker who planned 3 moves ahead. Robert was 24, the strongest of the brothers, quick to anger but loyal beyond question. Tommy was 21, the youngest, still trying to prove he belonged among men who'd already established themselves. Sarah was 50, her hands as work-worn as Jacob's, her face still beautiful despite everything the mountains demanded. What Jacob valued most wasn't money, though the moonshine brought in $30,000 a year, more than he'd ever earned in the mines. What he valued was legacy. His grandfather, Ezra Turner, had established their first still in Blackwater Hollow in 1925, during Prohibition. Blackwater Hollow got its name from the creek that ran through it, water so clear you could count pebbles 10 feet down but appearing black because of the depth and the shadows cast by mountains on either side. The hollow stretched 500 acres, running north to south between two ridges that rose 1,500 feet above the valley floor. Access was limited to two logging roads, both nearly impassable except in dry weather, both gated and chained by the Turner family, who'd owned the land since 1924. When Jacob's grandfather purchased it for $300 from a timber company that had already stripped the valuable hardwoods. The land itself wasn't much good for anything except moonshining. Too steep for farming, too remote for development, too rocky for grazing cattle. But for distilling illegal whiskey, it was paradise. 3 natural springs emerged from the mountainside, flowing year-round, producing water so pure you could drink it straight from the source. The forest provided endless firewood for heating the stills. The terrain offered natural concealment from aerial surveillance, and the isolation meant you could work without neighbors asking questions. Jacob's grandfather had recognized the potential immediately. For 40 years, the Turner family had operated in Blackwater Hollow without significant competition. Other families had their own territories, their own hollows, their own operations. The unwritten rule was simple: respect boundaries, don't encroach on another family's land, and everyone makes money without conflict. Tucker County was big enough for multiple moonshine operations. The market demand from cities like Charleston, Pittsburgh, and Washington, D.C. exceeded what any single family could produce. There was no reason for territorial disputes, no reason for violence, no reason to violate the code that kept mountain communities from tearing themselves apart. That code held for decades. Jacob's grandfather worked Blackwater Hollow until he died in 1961. Jacob's father took over, ran it until 1978, when black lung finally killed him at age 63. Jacob inherited the operation, expanded it, modernized the equipment while maintaining traditional methods, built the business into something that supported not just his immediate family, but cousins, nephews, in-laws who needed work. By 1986, Turner Moonshine was known across 3 states for quality and consistency. Then the Henderson family arrived from Randolph County in August of 1986 and changed everything. Raymond Lee Henderson was 47 years old, barrel-chested and aggressive, with a reputation in Randolph County for taking what he wanted and dealing with consequences later. He'd run moonshine operations in Randolph for 15 years, but increasing law enforcement pressure and competition from younger, more ruthless operators had squeezed his territory until profits barely covered expenses. He needed new land, needed it desperately, and when he heard about Blackwater Hollow, about the perfect water and the isolation, he decided the Turner family's 40-year claim didn't matter as much as his own survival. Raymond brought his 2 sons, Clayton, age 25, and Marcus, age 23, plus 6 associates who worked his stills and handled distribution. 8 men total who began operating in the southern section of Blackwater Hollow in mid-August, setting up equipment near one of the springs, cutting trails, establishing a camp. They didn't ask permission, didn't acknowledge that the land belonged to someone else. Just moved in as if 40 years of Turner family history meant nothing, as if the mountain code that had prevented violence for generations could be ignored when convenient. Daniel Turner discovered the Henderson operation on August 17, 1986, while checking the family's southernmost still. He'd been walking a trail he'd walked 1,000 times, rifle slung over his shoulder out of habit, when he smelled smoke that shouldn't have been there. He followed the scent half a mile through dense forest and found the Henderson camp 3 men working a still that was producing shine, using Turner family water on Turner family land, without permission, without acknowledgement, without respect. Daniel didn't confront them. Mountain sense told him to gather information first, understand the situation completely before acting. He watched from concealment for 30 minutes, counted men and equipment, noted the quality of their operation. Professional setup, not amateurs. These men knew what they were doing. That made them more dangerous. He backed away carefully, returned home, and told his father what he'd found. Jacob Turner listened in silence, face revealing nothing. But Daniel saw his father's hands tighten on the coffee cup until knuckles went white. The next day, August 18th, Jacob took all 4 sons to Blackwater Hollow to see the Henderson operation. Jacob Turner drove his 1979 Ford F-250 up the logging road to the Henderson camp on September 15th, 1986, with Daniel sitting beside him. He'd left Michael, Robert, and Tommy at home. This was a conversation between patriarchs, not a confrontation requiring backup. The truck's engine growled as it climbed the steep grade, tires slipping on loose gravel, exhaust pipes scraping rocks that jutted from the rutted path. Temperature was 52 degrees, overcast sky threatening rain that wouldn't come for another 3 days. Raymond Henderson was working the still when Jacob arrived, sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening his shirt despite the cool air. He looked up as the Ford pulled into the clearing, registered Jacob's face, and straightened slowly. His sons Clayton and Marcus emerged from the tree line, rifles in hand but not raised. The message was clear: prepared, but not yet hostile. Jacob climbed out of the truck, left his own rifle in the rack behind the seat. Daniel stayed in the passenger seat, window down, hand resting on his thigh near the pistol tucked in his belt. "Raymond Henderson," Jacob said. Not a question. A statement establishing that he knew exactly who'd invaded his land. "Heard you've been having trouble down in Randolph County. Heard the law's been squeezing you pretty hard?" Raymond nodded slowly, wiped his hands on a rag, tossed it aside. "Jacob Turner, heard about you too. Heard you run a good operation up here. Clean product, fair prices, no trouble with authorities." He paused. "Also heard you got more land than you're using. Figured there was room for both of us." Jacob's expression didn't change. "You figured wrong." The words hung in the mountain air. Clayton Henderson shifted his weight, rifle moving slightly. Daniel's hand moved closer to his pistol. The moment stretched, tension building like pressure before a thunderstorm. Raymond spread his hands in a gesture meant to look conciliatory. "Jacob, be reasonable. This hollow's 500 acres. You're only working the northern section. We're way down south, not interfering with your operations. We're not competition. We're barely neighbors." "It's my land," Jacob said quietly. "Been my family's land for 62 years. My grandfather bought it. My father worked it. I work it. My sons will work it when I'm gone. Every acre, every spring, every trail. Mine." Raymond's conciliatory expression hardened. "Your grandfather bought it from a timber company that stole it from the Shawnee before that. Nobody really owns these mountains, Turner. We're all just borrowing them while we're here." Jacob took 3 steps forward, not aggressive, but deliberate. "Philosophy's interesting, Henderson. But here's what matters. I have the deed. I pay the property taxes. I've maintained this land for 34 years, and I'm telling you politely to pack your equipment and leave." Raymond didn't move. "And if I don't?" The question wasn't defiant. It was genuine curiosity about where this would lead. Jacob met his eyes. "Then we'll have a problem neither of our families will walk away from whole." The Henderson family didn't leave. They expanded. By October 1st, 1986, they'd brought in 4 more men, established a second still near the Middle Spring, and increased production to 200 gallons per week. They weren't hiding anymore. They were claiming territory, establishing themselves as permanent fixtures in Blackwater Hollow. Every day they remained was another insult, another demonstration that Jacob Turner's warning had been empty, that 40 years of family legacy could be violated without consequence. Jacob tried official channels first. On October 3rd, he drove to the Tucker County Sheriff's Office in Parsons and filed a formal complaint about trespassers on his property. Deputy Sheriff Bill Harmon, 49 years old and 2 years from retirement, took the complaint with barely concealed disinterest. "Jacob, you know, I can't do much about this. You're both running illegal operations. You want me to arrest them? I gotta arrest you too. That what you want?" Jacob had stared at him for a long moment. "I want the law to protect property rights." Harmon shrugged. "Then maybe y'all should be running legal businesses." On October 7th, Jacob tried reasoning with Raymond Henderson one more time. This conversation was shorter, harder. Raymond's position had strengthened with his expanded operation. He had 12 men now, equipment worth $30,000 invested in Blackwater Hollow, buyers waiting for product. He wasn't leaving. "You should have taken this seriously when I gave you the chance," Jacob said. Raymond smiled without humor. "I am taking it seriously, Turner. That's why I'm still here. You want us gone? You'll have to make us leave. And I don't think you got the stomach for what that would require." October 10th, 1986, was a Friday. Temperature dropped to 34 degrees overnight. Frost formed on windshields and dead leaves crunched underfoot. Daniel Turner made his morning walk to check the family's main. Still in the northern section of Blackwater Hollow, following the trail he'd walked since he was 12 years old. He smelled something wrong before he saw it. The sharp chemical odor of spilled alcohol, the scorched metal smell of burned equipment. He started running. The still was destroyed. Not damaged. Destroyed. Someone had used axes and sledgehammers on the copper distilling columns, reduced them to twisted scrap metal. The mash barrels were overturned. 200 gallons of fermenting corn mash dumped onto the ground, soaking into the earth. The condenser coils were torn out, thrown into the creek, and written in spray paint on the largest oak tree, "Henderson Territory Now." Daniel stood in the ruins of his family's operation, looking at $40,000 in destroyed equipment and lost product. Looking at insults so profound, it couldn't be answered with words. His hands shook, not with fear, with rage so complete it felt like ice in his veins. He walked back to his truck, drove home, found his father in the kitchen drinking morning coffee. Jacob looked up, saw Daniel's face, and understood immediately. "How bad?" Jacob asked quietly. Daniel's voice was flat. "Everything. They destroyed everything. Jacob set down his coffee cup carefully, looked out the window at mountains his grandfather had walked into a century ago. When he spoke, his voice was calm, final. Call your brothers. Tell them to come home. It's time we handled this the way our grandfathers would have. October 22nd, 1986, Wednesday evening. Temperature outside was 39 degrees, dropping toward freezing. Inside the Turner family kitchen, a wood stove radiated heat that couldn't touch the coldness of what was being discussed. Jacob Turner sat at the head of the table, same table his grandfather had built in 1924 from oak cut in Blackwater Hollow. His 4 sons sat around him. Daniel to his right, methodical and already calculating logistics. Michael to his left, quiet but his jaw set with determination. Robert across from him, fists clenched on the table, Tommy at the far end, 21 years old, trying to look as resolved as his older brothers. Sarah Turner stood at the stove, back to the men, stirring soup nobody would eat. She hadn't spoken since her sons arrived an hour ago. Didn't need to. Everyone in that kitchen knew what was about to be decided. She just kept stirring, steady circular motion, while her husband prepared to send their boys into violence that would change them forever. 12 men, Jacob said. His voice was conversational, like he was discussing weather. Raymond Henderson and his 2 sons. 9 associates working the stills and handling distribution. Names we know, faces we've seen. They're not ghosts. Daniel spread a hand-drawn map on the table. Blackwater Hollow sketched from memory, X marks indicating Henderson camp locations, patrol patterns, vehicle positions. He'd spent 3 days watching, taking notes, learning their routine. They're split between 2 camps. Main operation at the Southern Spring, 6 men usually there. Smaller setup at Middle Spring, 3 to 4 men. The rest rotate, making runs to buyers, bringing supplies, but Friday through Sunday, they're all in the hollow. Full crew working weekend production. Michael leaned forward. They're not expecting trouble. We've complained but haven't acted. They think we're all talk. His finger traced routes on the map. We know these mountains better than they do. We know every trail, every hiding spot, every approach. They're working our land, but they don't understand it. That's their weakness. Robert's voice was harder than his brother's. What about their families? Henderson's got a wife back in Randolph County. Clayton's married with a kid. Jacob cut him off. We do what needs doing to protect our land. Nothing more. We're not murderers. We're men defending what's ours. Tommy, the youngest, spoke for the first time. His voice cracked slightly. Dad, this is 11 people we're talking about. 12 counting Raymond. That's not a fight. He stopped, unable to say the word. Jacob looked at his youngest son with something like sadness. That's exactly what it is, Tommy. And I won't force you into this. You're 21. You got your whole life ahead. You can walk away tonight, and nobody will think less of you. Tommy met his father's eyes, saw the weight there, the certainty, the resignation that this was the only path left. I'm not walking away. I'm asking if we're sure, if there's any other way. 4:47 in the morning, October 23rd, 1986. Temperature was 36 degrees. No moon, just starlight filtered through cloud cover that threatened snow the weather forecast said wouldn't arrive until next week. Jacob Turner sat in his Ford F-250, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The truck was parked on an old logging road, half a mile from the Henderson camp at the Southern Spring. hidden behind a stand of pine trees that blocked any view from below. Through the trees, Jacob could see a single propane light burning in what passed for the Henderson operations main building, an old hunting cabin that had stood abandoned for 20 years before Raymond moved in. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, checking his Remington 700 hunting rifle for the fourth time. Bolt action, 30-06 caliber, scope zeroed at 200 yards. Michael and Robert were in Robert's Chevy C10, parked 30 yards behind them, waiting for the signal. Tommy was positioned on the ridge above the camp, youngest but with the best eyesight, serving as lookout with a pair of binoculars and a walkie-talkie they'd bought at Radio Shack 3 days earlier. 4 men about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Jacob had made the rules clear the night before. No unnecessary suffering, no witnesses left to identify them. And most important, they finished this completely or not at all. Half measures would bring law enforcement and federal agents and prison time for everyone. If they were doing this, they were eliminating the threat entirely. All 12 Henderson men who knew about Blackwater Hollow, who could come back with reinforcements, who could testify. No survivors who'd want revenge. Just silence. Tommy's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie. 3 men visible in the cabin, 2 by the still. Nobody on patrol. They're drinking coffee, talking, not alert. Jacob nodded to himself. Predictable. The Henderson crew had gotten comfortable, convinced the Turners were too civilized for violence. That mistake would cost them everything. Jacob opened his door slowly. The dome light had been disabled 3 days earlier. No point advertising their presence. 4 Turner men climbed out of 2 trucks and moved through the darkness like hunters who'd walked these mountains their entire lives. Jacob went left toward the cabin. Daniel circled right toward the still. Michael and Robert spread out, covering escape routes. They moved in silence, boots finding ground instinctively, avoiding branches that would crack, rocks that would shift. Decades of hunting white-tailed deer in these mountains had taught them patience, stealth, and the ability to get within 20 feet of alert prey. The 2 men working the still never heard them coming. Brothers named Kyle and Dennis Morrison, ages 32 and 29, from Randolph County. They'd worked for Raymond Henderson for 6 years, were experienced moonshiners, knew their craft. But they didn't know these mountains. Didn't know that 3 yards behind them, Michael Turner had raised his Winchester Model 70, had aligned the crosshairs on Kyle's back, had exhaled slowly. The rifle spoke once. Kyle Morrison fell into the mash barrel. Dennis turned, mouth opening to shout. Robert's shotgun from 10 feet away cut him off. Dennis Morrison collapsed beside the still he'd been tending, blood mixing with spilled moonshine on the ground. The sound of the shots echoed once. Then the mountains swallowed them. In the cabin 30 yards away, 3 men looked up. Raymond Henderson was the first man out of the cabin, moving fast for someone who'd just been startled awake from half sleep. He carried a 12-gauge pump shotgun, already chambering around as he pushed through the door into pre-dawn darkness. His son Clayton followed, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. Behind them, Marcus Henderson and a man named Terry Wilcox hesitated in the doorway, silhouetted by the propane light inside. Jacob Turner was waiting 20 feet away, partially concealed behind a blue Ford pickup that belonged to the Henderson crew. He'd moved into position while the shots at the still were still echoing. When Raymond emerged, Jacob didn't hesitate, didn't announce himself, didn't offer a chance to surrender. Just raised his rifle and fired. Raymond Henderson took the round center mass, staggered backward into his son Clayton, and both men went down. Clayton shoved his father's body aside, tried to bring his rifle up. Jacob's second shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. Clayton fell, tried to crawl toward cover behind a stack of mash barrels. Daniel appeared from the darkness, rifle aimed down. "Don't move," Daniel said, quietly. Clayton Henderson looked up, saw death in Daniel Turner's face, and stopped crawling. Inside the cabin, Marcus Henderson and Terry Wilcox had doused the propane light. Darkness inside, darkness outside. They had the advantage of walls, narrow windows, defensive position. Michael and Robert approached from opposite sides, careful, patient, no rush. Time was on the Turner family side. Michael called out, voice conversational. "Marcus, Terry, you got two choices. Walk out with hands up, or we wait until one of you needs to use the bathroom or gets thirsty enough to do something stupid. Either way, this ends the same." Silence from inside the cabin. Then Terry Wilcox's voice, high and tight with fear. "You're gonna kill us anyway." "Why the hell would we come out?" Robert answered from the other side. "Because coming out means it's quick. Staying in there means we set fire to the cabin and you die slow. Your choice. You got 60 seconds. 42 seconds later, the cabin door opened slowly. Marcus Henderson came out first, hands raised, face pale in the growing dawn light. Terry Wilcox followed, trembling. Both men were unarmed. Both men understood exactly what was about to happen. Jacob stepped into view. Marcus saw him, saw Daniel beside him, saw Michael and Robert emerging from shadows, saw his father's body lying motionless near the cabin door. "You eliminated my father," Marcus said. Not a question. Statement of fact. Voice. Dead. "He destroyed my still," Jacob replied. "Stole from my land. Refused to leave when asked politely. Some actions have consequences." Marcus nodded slowly, accepting. "This doesn't end with us. You know that, right? Our people back in Randolph County, they'll know. They'll come for you." Jacob considered this. "Then I guess we better make sure nobody's left who wants revenge." He raised his rifle. Marcus Henderson closed his eyes. Terry Wilcox began to sob. The shots echoed across Blackwater Hollow, faded into morning mist, and left silence behind. 6 men dead in less than 15 minutes. Clayton Henderson was still alive, bleeding from his shoulder wound, consciousness fading. Jacob walked over, looked down at Raymond Henderson's eldest son. 25 years old, married to a woman named Jennifer, father to a 2-year-old daughter named Ashley, who'd grow up without knowing why her daddy never came home. "I'm sorry it came to this," Jacob said quietly. He meant it. Clayton looked up, pain and rage and acceptance mixing in his expression. "No, you're not. You're sorry you had to do it, but you're not sorry you did." He was right. Jacob raised his rifle one final time. 7:32 in the morning, October 23rd, 1986. Temperature had climbed to 41 degrees. Weak sunlight filtered through cloud cover, turning the fog silver as it drifted through the hollows. 3 miles north of the southern spring, at the Henderson operation's second camp near the middle spring, 4 men were beginning to understand that something had gone terribly wrong. They'd heard distant shots around 5 in the morning, faint pops that could have been hunters or backfiring trucks or nothing at all. Mountains played tricks with sound. But Raymond Henderson was supposed to have radioed by 6:30 for the morning check-in. It was past 7:30 now. Silence. Marcus Denton was 34 years old. Raymond Henderson's most experienced associate had been running Moonshine in 3 states for 15 years. He stood outside the smaller camp's main tent, CB radio handset in his grip, thumb on the transmit button. "Base camp, this is North Operation. Raymond, you copy?" Static. He tried again. "Clayton, Marcus, anybody at base respond." Nothing but white noise. Beside him, 3 younger men watched. James Tucker, 26, Brian Sawyer, 23, and Raymond's nephew, Dale Henderson, 22. All 3 looked nervous. Dale spoke first. "Maybe their radio died. Battery could be dead." Marcus shook his head. "Raymond charged that battery 2 days ago. It's good for 72 hours. He set down the handset, picked up his rifle. "Something's wrong." They made the decision to drive down to base camp rather than walk. Faster, and if there was trouble, the vehicle offered both transportation and cover. Marcus drove his Dodge Ram, James riding shotgun, Brian and Dale in the truck bed with rifles. The logging road was rough, forcing Marcus to keep speed below 15 miles per hour, grinding through ruts and over rocks that scraped the undercarriage. The 3-mile drive took 18 minutes. As they rounded the final curve before base camp came into view, Marcus saw the first body. Kyle Morrison, lying face down, 50 yards from where the still should have been operating, arms spread wide, rifle 3 feet from his outstretched hand. Marcus stopped the truck. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Dale Henderson vomited over the side of the truck bed. Marcus put the Dodge in reverse, began backing up carefully. "We're leaving. Right now." James stared at him. "What about the others? What about my Uncle Raymond?" Marcus's voice was flat. "Your uncle's dead. They're all dead. And if we don't leave immediately, we will be too." He continued backing up until he could turn the truck around, then accelerated as fast as the terrible road allowed. Behind them, Daniel Turner stepped out of the tree line, where he'd been waiting since 6 in the morning, watching the second camp through binoculars, knowing they'd eventually come to investigate. He lifted the walkie-talkie. "Dad, 4 more heading your way. Dodge Ram, dark blue, license plate." "I couldn't read." "They saw the bodies. They're running." Jacob Turner sat in his Ford at the junction where the logging road met Route 219, the only exit from Blackwater Hollow, unless you wanted to hike 15 miles through wilderness. He'd positioned his truck across the road, blocking passage. Michael and Robert were in the tree line on either side, rifles ready. Tommy was 100 yards back up the logging road. Insurance against anyone trying to flee on foot. When Marcus Denton's Dodge came around the curve and saw the roadblock, Marcus slammed the brakes. The truck skidded, fishtailed, stopped 30 yards from Jacob's Ford. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. Then Marcus threw the Dodge into reverse. Robert's shot took out the right rear tire. The truck lurched sideways, rim digging into gravel. Michael's shot took out the left rear tire. The Dodge settled onto its rims, immobilized. Marcus killed the engine, looked at James. We run, we split up. Maybe one of us makes it. James nodded. In the truck bed, Brian and Dale were already jumping out, sprinting for the tree line. Brian made it 12 feet before Tommy's rifle spoke from up the logging road. Dale made it to the trees, disappeared into dense undergrowth. Michael went after him. Robert moved toward the cab where Marcus and James were climbing out, hands raised. Dale Henderson ran through forest he didn't know, lungs burning, legs pumping, branches whipping his face and arms. He was 22 years old, had been working for his Uncle Raymond for 8 months, needed the money for community college tuition, had never hurt anyone, never done anything except make illegal whiskey, and try to survive in an economy that offered no legitimate options. He ran because running was the only choice left. Behind him, he could hear Michael Turner moving through the forest. Not running, just walking steadily, confident, a hunter tracking wounded prey who couldn't escape. Dale tried every trick he knew, changed direction randomly, doubled back, waded through a creek to break his scent trail, even though he knew dogs weren't tracking him. Nothing worked. Michael Turner had hunted these mountains for 26 years, had tracked deer, bear, wild turkey through terrain far more difficult than this. Every broken branch Dale left, every disturbed leaf, every footprint in soft earth was a signpost pointing Michael exactly where his prey had gone. After 15 minutes, Dale was exhausted. After 20 minutes, he was stumbling. After 23 minutes, he collapsed against a fallen oak, gasping, unable to continue. Michael emerged from the trees 30 seconds later. He wasn't even breathing hard. His rifle was raised, aimed, steady. Dale looked up, saw death approaching, and something broke inside him. "Please," he whispered. "Please. I got a girlfriend. Amy Winters. We're getting married next June. Please." Michael stopped 10 feet away. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition of shared humanity, of the terrible thing he was about to do, of the line he was crossing. Then his expression hardened. "You were working our land. Your uncle destroyed our still. Some things can't be forgiven." Dale closed his eyes. The shot echoed through the forest, faded, left only the sound of wind through bare branches. Back at the roadblock, Marcus Denton and James Tucker stood with their backs against the disabled Dodge Ram, watching Jacob Turner approach. Both men understood the situation completely. No negotiation possible, no mercy available, just the brutal mathematics of territorial violence. Marcus spoke first, voice steady despite knowing what came next. "Turner, I respect what you're doing. Your land, your rules, your right to defend it. But James here, he's just a kid, 26 years old, working to support his mama who's got cancer. He didn't destroy your still. He wasn't even there. Let him walk away." Jacob considered this, looked at James Tucker, who stood trembling, tears streaming down his face. Young man who'd made bad choices, worked for the wrong people, ended up in the wrong place at the worst possible time. "If I let him walk," Jacob said slowly, "he goes to the law. or he goes back to Randolph County and brings more men. Either way, my family ends up dead or in prison. I can't allow that. Marcus nodded. Then at least let him run, give him a chance. Sporting chance, like hunting deer. If he makes it out of these mountains, he earned his life. Jacob almost smiled. Almost. Mountains don't give anyone anything they don't earn. He raised his rifle. James broke and ran. Made it 8 steps before Robert's shot from the tree line dropped him. Marcus Denton didn't run. Just stood there, accepting. You're gonna burn for this, Turner. Maybe not in court. Maybe not in this life. But you're gonna burn. Jacob pulled the trigger. Marcus fell beside James Tucker, and the silence that followed felt heavier than all the shots that had come before. 11:17 in the morning, October 23rd, 1986. Temperature had reached 53 degrees. The fog had burned off, revealing blue sky and mountains stretching to the horizon in every direction. Jacob Turner sat on the front porch of his home, the house his grandfather had built 63 years earlier, and felt the weight of 11 deaths settle over him like a physical thing, pressing down on his shoulders, his chest, making it hard to breathe. His hands shook slightly as he tried to light a cigarette. Third match before the flame steadied enough to connect with tobacco. Inside the house, Sarah moved through rooms, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, wiping counters already spotless, sweeping floors already swept, washing dishes already washed. Busy work that kept her hands occupied while her mind tried to process what her husband and sons had done. She hadn't asked questions when they returned 3 hours earlier. Didn't need to. She'd seen their faces, seen the blood on Daniel's jacket, seen the way Tommy couldn't meet her eyes. She'd known this was coming since October 10th, when Daniel found the destroyed still. Had known and said nothing because mountain wives understood some things were inevitable. The 4 Turner sons sat in the living room, not speaking, not looking at each other. Daniel stared at his hands, turning them over repeatedly, as if seeing them for the first time. Michael sat motionless, eyes unfocused, replaying Dale Henderson's final moments. Hearing that plea about a girlfriend named Amy Winters who'd wait forever for a man who'd never return. Robert paced, unable to sit still. Energy with nowhere to go, now that the violence had ended. Tommy sat on the floor in the corner, knees drawn up, face buried in his arms. Shoulders shaking with silent sobs he tried to hide from his brothers. Jacob smoked his cigarette down to the filter, lit another from the butt of the first. Across the yard, he could see his nearest neighbor's house, the Pritchard place, 200 yards away through trees. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that less than 4 hours ago 11 men had died in the mountains behind them. Jacob wondered how long they could maintain the facade of normalcy. How long before someone noticed the Henderson crew hadn't returned from their weekend operation? How long before bodies were discovered? How long before West Virginia State Police came asking questions? He'd planned for this. They'd wiped down everything they'd touched, collected all the shell casings, worn gloves throughout. The rifles couldn't be traced because they weren't registered. Bought decades ago from private sellers, passed down through families. Their trucks had been parked far enough from the actual killing sites that tire tracks wouldn't matter. No witnesses existed except the 5 Turner family members. And mountain code meant you didn't testify against family, even under threat of prison. They'd covered their tracks as well as possible. But Jacob knew, from decades of reading about criminal cases, that forensic science was advancing rapidly. DNA evidence, fiber analysis, things he barely understood could potentially connect them to the crimes. More than forensic evidence, Jacob worried about human nature. Guilt had a way of eating people from the inside. Tommy was already breaking. Jacob could see it in his youngest son's eyes, the horror of what they'd done overwhelming the justification of why they'd done it. How long before Tommy's conscience drove him to confession? How long before the weight became unbearable? Jacob stood, walked into the house, found his sons in the living room. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "What we did this morning, we did together. As a family. To protect our land, our legacy, everything our grandfather and father built. The law won't see it that way. The law will call it murder, but we know the truth." 2:15 in the afternoon, October 23, 1986. Sheriff Thomas McAllister was 56 years old, had worn the badge in Tucker County for 28 years, and was thoroughly unprepared for what he was about to discover. He'd driven up to Blackwater Hollow because Jennifer Henderson, Clayton's wife, had called the sheriff's office at 1:30, worried that her husband hadn't returned from his weekend moonshine run. Normally, McAllister would have ignored such calls. Moonshiners missing was often due to getting arrested in another county or deciding to extend their trip. But Jennifer had sounded genuinely frightened, said her father-in-law. Raymond always called home by noon on Thursdays, and nobody was answering the radio at base camp. McAllister brought Deputy Carl Foster, 32 years old, 6 years on the job. They drove Foster's personal Jeep Cherokee because the logging roads would destroy a patrol car's suspension. The drive took 40 minutes, climbing elevation, following increasingly rough trails that most people didn't know existed. As they approached the Southern Spring area, McAllister saw the first body through the passenger window. Kyle Morrison lying exactly where he'd fallen 6 hours earlier, flies already gathering despite the cool temperature. McAllister's stomach dropped. "Carl, stop the vehicle." Foster stopped. Both men sat frozen, staring at the corpse. McAllister climbed out slowly, hand instinctively moving to his sidearm even though whoever had done this was clearly long gone. He approached Kyle Morrison's body, knelt beside it, checked for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. Single gunshot wound to the back, large caliber, probably .30-06 or similar hunting rifle. Death had been instantaneous. He stood, looked around, saw the destroyed still, saw Dennis Morrison's body beside it, saw blood trails leading toward the cabin. "Carl, radio for backup. State police, everyone available. We've got multiple bodies, crime scene bigger than anything this county's ever seen." Foster fumbled with the radio, hands shaking. McAllister walked toward the cabin, following the blood trail. Found Raymond Henderson's body just outside the door, chest wound, dead for hours. Found Clayton Henderson nearby, shoulder and head wounds, also dead. Inside the cabin, propane light still hanging from a hook, sleeping bags laid out, evidence of the Henderson crew's weekend operation. Outside again, McAllister found Marcus Henderson and Terry Wilcox, hands still raised as if frozen in their final moment of surrender. Both shot at close range. Professional execution. McAllister stood in the clearing, looking at 6 bodies, understanding with terrible clarity that this wasn't a fight that had escalated. This was systematic elimination. Someone had come to Blackwater Hollow with the specific intention of killing every Henderson crew member present. He thought about jurisdiction, about who owned this land, about the Turner family that had operated here for decades. Thought about the destroyed still Daniel Turner had reported finding 10 days earlier. Thought about mountain justice and territorial disputes and how quickly men could become killers when they believed the law couldn't protect what was theirs. His radio crackled. Foster's voice, high and tight. "Sheriff, I found more." "Jesus Christ, Tom, I found more bodies on the logging road." McAllister walked back to the Jeep, drove with Foster down toward the junction with Route 219, found Marcus Denton, James Tucker, and Brian Sawyer, where they'd fallen hours earlier. 9 bodies total. McAllister sat in the Jeep's passenger seat, felt the full weight of this investigation settle on shoulders not built to carry it. Tucker County didn't have resources for this. Didn't have forensic capabilities, didn't have homicide detectives, didn't have experience with mass killings. This would bring state police, FBI possibly, media attention that would turn their quiet mountain community into a spectacle. But before any of that, McAllister had to find 2 more Henderson crew members. Jennifer had said 12 men were working the operation this weekend. They'd found 9 bodies, 3 were still missing. McAllister looked at Foster. "Carl, we need to search every inch of this hollow. There are 3 more victims, somewhere." Foster nodded, face pale. Neither man wanted to find what they were looking for, but they drove deeper into Blackwater Hollow, following trails they'd never traveled, looking for death in a place that had always represented life and survival and the stubborn refusal of mountain people to surrender to economic devastation. At 3:41 in the afternoon, they found Dale Henderson. At 4:12, they found the remains of Michael Turner's methodical hunt. By 6 o'clock in the evening on October 23, 1986, news of 11 bodies discovered in Blackwater Hollow had spread through Tucker County like wildfire racing up a mountain ridge. The official announcement wouldn't come until the state police press conference at 8. But in the small mountain communities, information traveled through phone calls, CB radio chatter, and conversations at gas stations and grocery stores faster than any official channels. By nightfall, everyone in Tucker County knew that the Henderson crew had been eliminated, and most suspected who'd done it. The community fractured immediately. At Miller's General Store in Parsons, the county seat, arguments erupted between customers who'd known each other for decades. On one side stood those who believed the Turner family had committed cold-blooded murder, had systematically executed 11 men who were simply trying to survive in an economy that offered no legitimate opportunities. These voices demanded justice, wanted Jacob Turner and his sons arrested, prosecuted, locked away for life. They argued that property disputes didn't justify mass killing, that civilized people settled disagreements through courts and legal processes, not rifles and ambushes. On the other side stood mountain traditionalists who understood the code that governed Appalachian life long before state governments and federal laws existed. These voices argued that Raymond Henderson had violated fundamental principles by operating on another family's land without permission, by destroying the Turner still, by refusing to leave when asked politely. They maintained that Jacob Turner had done what any mountain man would do when faced with theft of his legacy and disrespect of his family's 40-year claim. The law couldn't protect moonshine operations. Therefore, moonshiners had to protect themselves. That was reality. Harsh, but undeniable. At Blackwater Baptist Church, Reverend Samuel Crawford struggled through Thursday evening service. The church was packed beyond capacity, over 200 people crammed into a building designed for 120, all seeking answers he couldn't provide. Crawford was 62 years old, had pastored this congregation for 34 years, had presided over weddings and funerals for both the Turner and Henderson families. He stood at his pulpit, looking at faces twisted with grief and anger and confusion, and tried to find words that would bring comfort. "We ask why," Crawford said, his voice breaking. "Why this violence? Why couldn't neighbors resolve their differences without bloodshed? Why did economic desperation drive men to claim territory that wasn't theirs? Why did pride matter more than 11 human lives?" He gripped the pulpit, steadying himself. "I don't have answers. I have only grief. Grief for the Henderson family who lost fathers, sons, brothers. Grief for the Turner family who believed violence was their only option. Grief for our community that must now carry this scar forever. And grief for the knowledge that we're all capable of darkness when pushed far enough, when systems fail us, when survival demands we become something we never thought we'd be." The congregation sat in silence. Some wept openly. Others stared at their hands, wrestling with questions that had no comfortable answers. Outside, temperature dropped toward freezing, and the first snow of the season began falling 3 weeks earlier than the forecast predicted. The division ran through families, splitting them along generational and philosophical lines. Sons argued with fathers about whether the Turner family's actions were justified. Wives argued with husbands about whether the Henderson crew had brought death upon themselves. At the Riverside Diner on Route 219, a fistfight broke out between two men who'd been friends since childhood, disagreeing so violently about mountain justice versus modern law that words became shoves, became punches, until the owner threatened to call Sheriff McAllister. The whole county seemed to be coming apart, held together only by the thin thread of shared history that was fraying rapidly under the weight of 11 corpses and questions nobody could answer satisfactorily. October 28th, 1986, Tuesday morning. Temperature was 29 degrees, first hard freeze of the season. West Virginia State Police, Captain Richard Morrison, stood outside the Turner family home at 6 in the morning, watching his breath form clouds in the frigid air. Behind him, 12 state troopers were positioned around the property, covering all exits, weapons ready but not drawn. Morrison was 47 years old. 26 years in law enforcement, had worked cases across West Virginia from the Chemical Valley near Charleston to the northern Panhandle near Wheeling. He'd investigated murders, drug operations, domestic violence that tore families apart. But the Blackwater Hollow Massacre was different, systematic, calculated, and motivated by something he understood even if he couldn't condone. The investigation had moved quickly. Forensic evidence was limited, but witness statements from Randolph County painted a clear picture. Multiple people confirmed Raymond Henderson had been operating in Blackwater Hollow on Turner family land. Jennifer Henderson provided documentation showing her father-in-law had destroyed a Turner still on October 10th. Ballistics showed all victims were killed with common hunting rifles, 30-06, and similar calibers owned by thousands of West Virginians. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence, nothing concrete connecting the Turner family to the crimes. But Morrison had worked these mountains long enough to understand mountain justice. He knew who'd done this. Proving it would be harder. Morrison knocked on the front door. Solid, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the cold morning air. Movement inside. Footsteps approaching. The door opened. Jacob Turner stood there, dressed in work clothes, coffee cup in hand, completely unsurprised to see state police surrounding his home. "Captain Morrison," Jacob said calmly, "I expect you're here about the Henderson situation." Morrison nodded. "Jacob Turner, I'm placing you under arrest for 11 counts of first-degree murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Jacob set down his coffee cup carefully, turned and called into the house. "Sarah, would you fetch the boys?" Sarah appeared in the hallway behind him, face composed but eyes red from 5 days of tears. She called upstairs. "Daniel, Michael, Robert, Tommy. The police are here." 4 Turner sons came down the stairs one by one, dressed, prepared, moving with the resignation of men who'd been expecting this moment. Tommy was pale, looked like he hadn't slept since Thursday. Robert's jaw was set, defiant, even in surrender. Michael and Daniel showed nothing. Faces carved from the same stone as these mountains. Morrison looked at the 5 Turner men standing together, father and 4 sons who'd made a choice and were now facing its consequences. Daniel Turner, Michael Turner, Robert Turner, Tommy Turner. You're all under arrest for 11 counts of first-degree murder. He recited their rights while troopers moved forward with handcuffs. None of the Turner men resisted. They stood with hands behind their backs, accepted the cold metal around their wrists, allowed themselves to be led toward the waiting patrol vehicles. Sarah watched from the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, not speaking. What could she say? Her family had chosen this path. Now they'd walk it to whatever end waited. As Morrison was loading Jacob into the lead vehicle, the patriarch spoke quietly. "Captain, I won't insult your intelligence by denying what we did, but I'll tell you true. Raymond Henderson stole from us, destroyed our livelihood, refused to leave our land when asked. The law couldn't help us. We had to help ourselves. That's how it's always been in these mountains." Morrison met his eyes. "Jacob, I understand the code you live by. I grew up in coal country myself. My grandfather was a moonshiner during Prohibition. But understanding doesn't change the law. You killed 11 men. Some while they were surrendering. Some while they were running. That's not defense of property, that's execution." Jacob nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right, Captain. Maybe we crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed, but when the system fails you, when there's no legal way to protect what's yours, what choice do men have except to become what they never wanted to be?" Morrison had no answer for that. just closed the patrol car door, walked to his own vehicle, and led the convoy down the mountain toward Parsons and the county jail that would hold the Turner family until trial. Behind them, Sarah Turner stood on her porch, watching 5 men she loved disappear down a road they'd never fully return from, even if they somehow avoided prison. They'd already lost what mattered most, the ability to look at themselves without seeing 11 faces, asking why. The trial of Jacob Turner and his 4 sons began on March 2, 1987, in the Tucker County Courthouse, a brick building constructed in 1921 that had never hosted a case of this magnitude. The venue hadn't been changed because finding an impartial jury anywhere in West Virginia proved impossible. The Blackwater Hollow Massacre had become statewide news, dividing communities across Appalachia along the same philosophical lines that split Tucker County. Ultimately, the judge decided that Tucker County residents deserved to judge their own for better or worse. 55 combined counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution, led by State Attorney General's Office Prosecutor Catherine Williams, had confessions from all 5 defendants admitting their presence at Blackwater Hollow on October 23rd, had forensic evidence linking the Turner family's vehicles to the crime scenes through tire tracks and paint transfer, had testimony from Randolph County residents establishing motive. The case was overwhelming, built on physical evidence and the defendants' own admissions. The Turner family hadn't tried to hide what they'd done. They'd simply done it and waited for consequences. The defense, 5 court-appointed attorneys from Charleston who looked overwhelmed from the opening statements, attempted to argue extreme emotional disturbance and defense of property. They painted a picture of men driven to desperate acts by economic devastation, by theft of irreplaceable family legacy, by a legal system that couldn't protect moonshine operations because moonshining itself was illegal. They brought in economic experts who testified about Tucker County's 42% unemployment rate, cultural anthropologists who explained mountain codes predating state and federal law, even a psychologist who discussed the effects of hopelessness on decision-making. Williams destroyed these arguments methodically. Emotional disturbance doesn't involve 5 days of planning, she told the jury during closing arguments. Doesn't involve positioning family members at strategic locations. Doesn't involve executing men who'd surrendered with hands raised. Doesn't involve hunting a 22-year-old boy through the forest and shooting him while he begged for his life. She paused, letting that image settle over the courtroom. Defense of property doesn't justify 11 executions. The Turner family had legal options. They could have filed civil suits, could have sought injunctions, could have allowed law enforcement to handle the situation. They chose violence instead. They chose to become judge, jury, and executioner. The jury, 12 Tucker County residents who knew both families, who understood mountain culture but also understood murder, deliberated for 26 hours over 4 days. The courtroom was silent when they returned. The foreman, a retired coal miner named Harold Jenkins, who'd worked beside Jacob Turner in the mines 30 years earlier, read the verdicts with a voice that shook. Guilty. All charges. All 5 defendants. When the word guilty echoed through the courtroom for the 55th time, a woman in the gallery, Raymond Henderson's sister, let out a sob that sounded like it had been torn from her chest. Across the aisle, Sarah Turner sat motionless, face showing nothing, hands folded in her lap. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge William Parsons, 71 years old, 43 years on the bench, looked at the 5 Turner men standing before him. "Mr. Turner, your sons, I understand the circumstances that led to your actions. I understand economic desperation, cultural codes, the feeling that the system had failed you. But I cannot and will not condone what you did. 11 men are dead, 11 families destroyed. Your actions have traumatized this entire community." He paused, adjusted his glasses. "Jacob Turner, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Daniel Turner, life without parole. Michael Turner, life without parole. Robert Turner, 75 years. Tommy Turner, 60 years. Jacob." Michael Turner served 18 years in the Mount Olive Correctional Complex in Mount Olive, West Virginia. During that time, he worked in the prison woodshop, teaching younger inmates carpentry skills his father had taught him. He was quiet, caused no trouble, earned respect even from violent criminals through sheer presence and an unspoken code of honor that translated even behind concrete walls and razor wire. Guards said he never complained, never sought special treatment, never discussed the Blackwater Hollow Massacre with anyone. On November 7th, 2004, at age 70, Jacob Turner died of complications from black lung disease. The coal dust he'd breathed for 3 decades finally claiming him. His last words to the prison chaplain were reportedly, "I protected what was mine. Whether that was right or wrong, God will judge. I can't anymore." He was buried in the prison cemetery under a simple marker: Jacob M. Turner, 1934 to 2004. No mention of father, moonshiner, or the 11 lives he'd taken. Just dates marking the span of a life that had transformed from honest mountain work to unthinkable violence over 500 acres of land that nobody would ever distill whiskey on again. Sarah visited every Sunday for 16 years, making the 2-hour drive from Tucker County to Mount Olive without fail, even when arthritis made gripping the steering wheel agony. She died of a stroke in 2002, 66 years old, having never remarried, never left the mountains, never stopped believing her husband had done what mountain men had always done when faced with threats they couldn't resolve through law. Daniel Turner remains incarcerated at the Huttonsville Correctional Center, 66 years old now. Parole denied in 2007, 2017. In a rare interview with a documentary filmmaker in 2019, Daniel said only, "I followed my father into coal mines, into moonshining, into violence. That's what mountain sons do. I've had 33 years to think about whether that was right. Still don't have an answer." Michael Turner was released on parole in 2015 after serving 29 years. He's 65 now, lives in a small apartment in Elkins, works part-time at a hardware store, never married, never had children. Rarely speaks about October 23, 1986. When asked during a 2020 interview, he said, "I killed a boy begging for his life. That's something you carry forever. No amount of time erases it." Robert Turner served 31 years, paroled in 2018. He tried to build a life, rented a house in Parsons, got a job at a lumber mill, attended therapy twice weekly. But the weight never lifted. On June 14, 2021. At age 59, Robert Turner walked into Blackwater Hollow with a hunting rifle and took his own life at the exact location where he'd shot Dennis Morrison 35 years earlier. His suicide note was 11 words long. I see their faces every night. 35 years wasn't enough time, sorry. Tommy Turner, the youngest, served 28 years and was paroled in 2014. He's 59 now. Lives in Charleston, works as a janitor at a community college, attends church every Sunday. He speaks occasionally at schools about the consequences of violence, though he rarely discusses specific details. I was 21, he told students in 2023. I thought I was protecting my family. Instead, I helped destroy 2 families and traumatized everyone who knew us. The Henderson family scattered like ashes in wind. Jennifer Henderson, Clayton's widow, sold everything and moved to Ohio with her daughter Ashley, who's 41 now, works as a nurse, knows the story but doesn't discuss it. Raymond Henderson's widow, Margaret, died in 1993 of heart failure, 62 years old, having never recovered from losing her husband and 2 sons. The Randolph County Moonshine operation collapsed, nobody willing to continue work that had cost 11 lives. Blackwater Hollow itself changed hands 3 times. Jacob Turner's estate sold it in 1990 for $22,000. The new owner, a logging company from Ohio, discovered the property's dark history and resold it in 1995. Current owners, a conservation group that purchased it in 2008, have declared it protected wilderness. No development, no commercial use, just 500 acres of forest slowly reclaiming the clearings where men once made whiskey and died, defending territory that meant everything and nothing. There's no memorial in Tucker County, no plaque, no historical marker explaining that this was the site of the Blackwater Hollow Massacre. The community just moved on, as mountain communities do, covering scars with layers of normal life until they almost disappear. Almost. But if you drive through Tucker County on an October morning when temperature drops to 36 degrees and fog rolls through the hollows, you might feel something in the air. Not ghosts, nothing so simple. Just the weight of choices made, of codes followed to their terrible conclusions, of violence done in the name of protecting what was yours that destroyed everything worth protecting. The trial divided Tucker County permanently. Families that had known each other for generations stopped speaking. Churches split over whether the Turner family had committed murder or defended their legacy. Even now, 38 years later, old-timers in Parsons will argue about whether Jacob Turner was a mass murderer or a desperate father protecting what little he had. The question that haunts Tucker County isn't whether the Turner family was guilty under law. The verdict answered that. The question is whether they were wrong under the older code that governed these mountains before West Virginia existed, before the United States existed, the code that said a man protects his land and his legacy no matter the cost. And where exactly is the line between defending what's yours and becoming a monster? 11 men died over 500 acres of mountain land. The Turner family spent the rest of their lives in prison or carrying guilt that never diminished. The moonshine recipe that caused it all was never used again, too blood-soaked to pass down, too heavy with death to honor. In the end, everyone lost. The Henderson family lost 11 men. The Turner family lost their freedom, their legacy, their souls. Tucker County lost its innocence, forced to confront questions it would rather avoid about justice, survival, and how far desperate men will go when systems fail them. If this story made you think about territorial violence, economic desperation, and the price communities pay when old codes collide with modern law, leave your like and share this video. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories that challenge what we think we know about right and wrong, about honor and violence, about how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary darkness when pushed to the edge. Comment below. Where do you draw the line between protecting what's yours and losing your humanity in the process? What would you have done in Jacob Turner's position? Because these stories aren't just history. They're still happening somewhere, with different people facing the same impossible choices in forgotten places where the system has failed and desperation takes hold. Until next time, remember that the monsters we fear aren't always born that way. Sometimes they're made, one stolen acre, one destroyed still, one desperate decision at a time.